Hey everybody, it's Nicole Byer here with some hot takes from Wayfair. A cozy corduroy sectional from Wayfair? Yeah, that's a hot take. Go on and add it to your cart and take it. A pink glam nightstand from Wayfair? Scalding hot take. Take it before I do. A mid-century modern cabinet from Wayfair that doubles as a wine bar? Do I have to say it? It's a hot take. Get it at wayfair.com and enjoy that free shipping too.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
Finding great candidates to hire can be like, well, trying to find a needle in a haystack. Sure, you can post your job to some job board, but then all you can do is hope the right person comes along. Which is why you should try ZipRecruiter for free at ziprecruiter.com/zip. ZipRecruiter doesn't depend on candidates finding you. It finds them for you. Its powerful technology identifies people with the right experience and actively invites them to apply to your job. You get qualified candidates fast. So while other companies might deliver a lot of hay, ZipRecruiter finds you what you're looking for. The needle in the haystack.
See why 4 out of 5 employers who post a job on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. And right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free. That's right, free at ziprecruiter.com/zip. That's ziprecruiter.com/zip. ziprecruiter.com/zip.
Hey, Warmer from Evo! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you. It's another conference preview edition. We are going to be looking at the ACC today. Have to look at the trends, the styles of play in general that we get in an now 18-team conference that spans all across the country. It's coast to coast, which, this is a podcast called Coast to Coast Hoops, so I guess the ACC is very fitting for it. We'll be looking at those styles of play, the betting trends, and so much more in segment number 1. Segment number 2, he joined me on this podcast last year. He does amazing work over at Bustin' Brackets, Tristan Freeman. We're going to be looking at all 18 teams with him, the coaching changes that we've seen, the outlook on these teams. I know that Tristan is also doing some work over at the Field of 68. He does amazing work with Sleepers Media. He's going to be joining me in segment number 2, and then in the final segment, I'm going to get you guys my projector or finish for this wonderful conference. If you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of 2 ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, Larry M, naming does not matter, so per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is via an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. While I did not get in any Twitter/X questions today, everything is powered by EdgeBoost. EdgeBoost is making sure that bettors are able to have access to their funds whenever and wherever. With EdgeBoost, 100% of gambling transactions do get approved. And when you go to edgeboost.bet, put in that promo code of Greg, G-R-E-G. That'll get you a dollar for dollar match on your first deposit up to $25. And with having a conference preview today, that means that the news and notes I miss in college basketball on Thursday, I'll polish up tomorrow. That includes the Cal State Bakersfield situation with Mr. Rod Barnes no longer being their coach. I'll have a lot to say on that the rest of the week, so be on the lookout there. And how about if we do dive in on an ACC that is going to be a whole big bundle of fun this year with just so many different styles in this conference, because you obviously had one of these slower teams in all of college basketball in Virginia under Tony Bennett. They were always in the bottom 5 in terms of total possessions per game. Now you've got Ryan Odom that's taking over, so certainly I don't think that Virginia is going to be back in like the bottom 5 in terms of total possessions per game, because even under Ron Sanchez last year, he was pretty much like a clone of Mr. Tony Bennett, so his teams were still playing really, really stinking slow. They were 361st in the country in terms of total possessions per game, and you take a look at Odom coming on over from VCU. Was his team a blazer? No, 272nd in the country in terms of total possessions per game, but certainly you could expect a little bit of faster play, but you do have quite a few slow teams out in this conference. Like Duke, ever since John Shire has taken over, they've been a slow tempo team, 274th in the country last year in terms of total possessions per game. North Carolina even throttled it back a little bit last year. North Carolina obviously never going to be playing super duper slow, but they were 45th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Typically they're playing a little bit faster. Now Louisville underwent a big giant coaching change. They were actually a mid-tempo team though, about 151st in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Cal has been starting to play a little bit more up-tempo ever since Mark Madsen got there, 95th in the country in terms of total possessions possessions per game. The coming around of the schools out there on the West Coast along with SMU certainly have cause for some shakeups. SMU was about 113th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, and then Samford is a relatively slow and controlled team, 256th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, with Kyle Smith and his nerdball system being able to take over there. You don't necessarily have teams that are going to go like full octane, super duper up tempo in this conference, but you obviously do have a melting pot of different teams, some that are very much going to be prioritizing being able to get down low, some of these teams that are very much going to be looking to pop it and lock it from three-point range. Obviously, with Louisville, they're a team that they very much do love to be able to shoot it from three-point range, and if you just take a look at the three-point shot rate, that's a percentage of shots that come from three-point range. You do have quite a few teams in this conference that they like to bomb it from three, and with Ryan Odom taking over after he was at VCU last year, that should go even further, as VCU was 21st in the country in terms of the percentage of their total shots that came from three. That would be second to only Louisville. Louisville was 20th in the country with this regard, so those are two teams that they very much are going to be looking to bomb it from three. And then you get a team like North Carolina that they're always looking to pound it inside. They're looking much more at their big men. They're not going to be dead last in terms of their three-point shot rate or anything like that, but certainly a team like North Carolina last year, they were looking to still be able to get the ball inside. They were 19th in the country in terms of percentage of their shots that came from three. Duke is a team that was taking quite a few shots from three last year. They were 61st in the country with 44.6% of their field goal attempts coming from three-point range, so they're certainly a team that is looking to be able to get some good shots from the outside, so that's going to be an interesting case. Florida State always was a team that prioritized getting the ball inside under Leonard Hamilton. They were 308th in the country in terms of percentage of their shots that came from three. Going to be interesting to see what Luke Locks does this season. I have a feeling that is going to be going a little bit more northward, if I did have to guess. And then you had a team like Virginia last year was 87th in the country in terms of percentage of their shots that came from three. Certainly, I do think that's going to be going a little bit more northward. And Wake Forest, they just didn't have a lot of three-point shooting last year. They were 275th in the country in terms of percentage of their shots that came from three. And then SMU was 278th in the country with this regard as well. And if you just take a look at the overall defense in this conference, it's very hit or miss, as you have a team like a Pittsburgh that they try to hang their hat on defense, but last year you could tell that they just weren't necessarily the same down low, and that caused for a little bit of issue and strife with them. With Pittsburgh in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, they finished just 150th in the country with that regard. Your best defensive team last year, I mean, everyone wants to talk about the amazing offense that they had, but Duke was number 4 in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. That was by far number 1 in the conference. Virginia had taken a step back, but Ryan Odom coming on over from VCU. VCU was actually number 5 in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. That should be able to help out the just fortitude and the overall defense in this conference, as, I mean, for Duke, they were pretty much the only team that was within the top 20 with regards to points allowed on a per possession basis. Your next best team was Clemson. They're another relatively slow and controlled team. They were 29th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, and while Wake Forest took a massive setback on offense, on defense they were 41st in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. And it is really interesting to be taking a look at these teams and their overall styles, as North Carolina last year was a little bit better on defense as well. I'm not going to say that they were amazing by any stretch of the imagination, but with North Carolina about 143rd in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. 2 years ago they were rock solid, and then that last year under Armando Bacot and company, man, when they were number 1 in the country and then they just fell off a cliff. That was rough. And what else I noticed in this conference, you don't have a lot of teams that generate turnovers. You just take a look at some of the bottom teams in all of college basketball in terms of turnover generation, and the ACC was loaded with quite a few of them, as these teams were all outside the top 300 in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. You had Notre Dame at 320th in the country. They were really the biggest outlier there. And then you also had North Carolina 304th in the country in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. You had a team like Boston College, who they were rough all around, but they were 292nd in the country in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. Virginia was 279th, with, once again, having Brian Odom coming on over from VCU. That is certainly a number that should be certainly going in the right direction, but Virginia Tech was 249th in the country. Cal was 245th, so you've got a lot of teams that they don't necessarily prioritize being able to generate turnovers. There are much more teams that are looking to be able to dominate on the glass, be able to get the second and third chance opportunities, so that makes things very intriguing as well. And if you're looking at the betting trends that we had out there in the ACC, for the ACC as a whole, it was just a very underwhelming conference last year. I'm not talking in terms of totals, I'm talking about in terms of against a spread record and trying to be be able to make you money, as the team that was able to cover the most games in the ACC, that'd be Duke. They were 25-14 against the spread. They were very rock solid. And then you did have Cal go 19-13-1 against the spread. Clemson was 20-14. Syracuse 18-13-2 against the spread. Louisville was 20-15. And then Florida State goes 17-15. But NC State, after they made their Final Four run, 10-21 against the spread. That was a bottom 10 mark in all of college basketball. Miami was one of your biggest fades in the country at 11-20 against the spread. Virginia and Virginia Tech both went 13-19 against the spread. You had Boston College, Pittsburgh, and Wake Forest all either go 13-18 or 13-18-1 against the spread. North Carolina was 16-20-1 against the spread. Notre Dame was 14-18-1 against the spread. Stanford was 16-19 against the spread. So a lot of up-down all around there, and with just such a spread out conference in general, it makes it intriguing to take a look at how teams are able to cover on the road. And honestly, you had a few teams that were really good at being able to cover on the road. Louisville and Duke both went 9-2 against the spread in true road games. Cal was able to go 10-3 against the spread on the road. That's remarkable considering they had to go from west to east for most of those games. Clemson was 8-4 against the spread. Virginia Tech and Syracuse went 6-4 and 6-4-1 respectively against the spread on the road. Now you did have North Carolina, Georgia Tech, Florida State all go either 4-7 or 4-7-1 against the spread on the road. Boston College was 3-7 against the spread on the road. Stanford was 3-8 against the spread on the road. Pittsburgh 3-9, and NC State 2-9 against the spread. So big giant issues there, and I think the biggest issue and the reason why you saw so many of those teams on the road be able to cover is that teams as a favorite in this conference just didn't fare well outside of Duke. Duke was 24-14 against the spread in the role of a favorite. Syracuse won 5-3-1. Clemson was 17-12 as a favorite. SMU 16-12 against the spread as a favorite, and even Georgia Tech was 9-7 against the spread as a favorite. But Miami had a paltry 3-11 against the spread as a favorite. Notre Dame 5-12 against the spread as a favorite. Pittsburgh 10-14-1 against the spread as a favorite. Wake Forest 9-11-1 against the spread as a favorite. Virginia Tech 3-6 against the spread as a favorite. Boston College 2-6. So massive issues there. And I talk about the melting pot of different styles that you've got in the ACC, but also having some teams that are a little bit more slow and controlled, and that bared out with regards to the over rate in this conference, as you only had 4 teams hit more than 52.38% that you need to be able to break even / get above, shall we say, profitability on a -110 spread. With regards to the over, Miami was your best over team, 19 overs to 12 unders. Virginia was actually 19 overs to 13 unders, mainly because of their bad defense last year. Boston College, 18 overs, 13 unders. Duke, 20 overs, 18 unders, and a push. And then a lot of teams that were just hovering right around 500. Cal, SMU, North Carolina, they all either went 17 and 16 to the over, 18 overs to 17 unders, and then North Carolina, 19 overs to 18 unders, so one more over than under. You had Clemson, Notre Dame, and Virginia Tech all play the same amount of games to the over rather than the under. But Louisville, I know that we love to talk about their three-point shooting, 22 unders to 13 overs. They played some good defense. NC State, 19 unders to 12 overs. Florida State, Wake Forest, 19 overs to 13 overs apiece. Georgia Tech, 19 unders to 15 overs. Stanford, 19 unders to 16 overs. Syracuse, 17 unders, 15 overs, and a push. And when it came to conference play, you could tell that, for lack of a better term, it did feel like some of these teams just got a little bit worn out. Boston College was a very good over team because they just didn't play any defense, 14 overs to 6 unders. Virginia, once again, didn't play any defense, 14 overs to 7 unders. Miami, same deal, 12 overs to 8 unders. The only team that was really profitable to the over because they were just really good on offense was Duke, 13 overs to 10 unders when it came to conference play. But then you had essentially 6 different teams hit between 55 to 61% to the under in conference play. NC State, Pittsburgh, they were both 11 unders to 9 overs with a push thrown in there for Pittsburgh as well. SMU and Notre Dame, 13 unders to 9 overs. And then Louisville, North Carolina, 14 unders to 9 overs. And if you take a look at what happened in terms of the non-conference play, you did see just a relatively equal split between overs and unders, so you did have a few outliers. You had a quartet of teams that played at least 66% of their non-conference games to the under. Louisville, 8 unders to 4 overs in non-conference play. Florida State, 8 unders to 3 overs. NC State, 3 overs to 8 unders. And Wake Forest, 9 unders to 2 overs. So that's what you're getting in the ACC. Just a lot of teams that they had some interesting defense. You've got a few more slow teams and fast teams, but you've got now a very wide-ranging conference. We're going to be talking about that and so much more with all 18 rosters being featured with our good friend Tristan Freeman. He does such amazing work over at Busting Brackets, and he joins me next right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the Beast and Family Podcast, the ACC Conference Preview Edition. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the Beast and Family Podcast. Always great to have this man aboard. He joined me for the ACC Conference Preview Edition last year. He's joining me once again as he does an amazing job over at Busting Brackets. He does great work with his articles over at the Field of 68. I know that he's been doing some work over at Sleepers Media, and this man is just doing an incredible job getting set for the upcoming college basketball season. That'd be Tristan Freeman. You're able to follow him on the old Twitter/X at Oops351. And Tristan, it's always great to get you aboard. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Greg. Appreciate it.
I appreciate you. And Tristan, I'm feeling good about this ACC. I think that there's a lot of rock solid teams. So how about if we get like the vegetables out of the way before we get to the real steak? And with Boston College, I don't see how this team finishes anywhere other than like the bottom two, bottom three of the conference, other than Donald Hand, who is rock solid. They just don't have a lot coming back. I have big time question marks as to who's going to be running the point for the team. And I feel like this is a theme for Boston College and so many of these teams. The teams that really don't have a defined point guard, I think, are really going to struggle in the ACC this year.
Yeah, and point guard play was fairly strong in the league last year. Obviously, you had teams like Duke and Louisville, who probably has some of the better guards overall, but even teams who weren't as good, Notre Dame, Pittsburgh, Stanford, they had very good guard play as well. So I think for any team this year that wants to compete, you're going to have really good point guard play and perimeter play in general.
Yep, absolutely. And for Boston College, other than Donald Hand, they just really don't have a lot here. And this is going to be a team that's probably going to be struggling a little bit more with regards to guard play. But with Stanford, I know that a lot of projections have them towards the bottom of the conference. I do see a little bit of upside here. Benny Gieler coming back after he had a nice year last year, bringing back Ryan Archibald, Chisa Mokpara. I recognize that they didn't do a ton in the transfer portal because it's just hard to be able to get into Stanford in general with the academic requirements. But I do think that for Stanford, out of a lot of the teams that people are picking, and air quotes here, towards the bottom, I think that they've got the most upside with just bringing back guys from a season ago.
Yeah, I mean, that's the one positive. You mentioned Apar, who averaged 16 a game at Harvard. So he is a guy who is capable of being an elite player. Obviously, losing their big three with so much production, but it does present opportunities for guys to come in. But it would have been nice had they been able to keep, Jalen Petty, who now is at Texas Tech. I mean, he's someone that could have been a lead guard for them. And now, is Benny Gieler good enough to be a point guard in the ACC? They bring in, D2 transfer and Jeremy Dent-Smith. He's possibly going to have to start. There's just a lot of questions, and they're going to need several of these guys to break out just to be competitive, and we'll see if that's able to work. They still have the fact that you have to go travel across the country and play them, so their home games are still going to be tough no matter what. But are they going to be able to win any of their road games? I'm not sure that's going to be possible.
And I'm so glad that you brought up the travel because I feel like Stanford is being lumped sort of in the same pocket as Cal. With Cal, have to question what you're going to get out of Nolan Dorsey after he was solid over at Campbell last year. Rightus Petratus, he comes back from a season ago, but they're going to be looking to some mix and match guards. Day-Day Ames had a solid year over at Virginia, but is he going to be really a dominant guy? I really think that Chris Bell is a nice upside guy myself, and Lee Dort is able to be solid down low, but he's not much of an offensive guy. John Camden, solid year over at Delaware, but first time around at Virginia Tech in the ACC, really didn't do much there. Need to get your thoughts on Cal because I think Mark Madsen is a heck of a coach. It just doesn't feel like he has the roster to be overly competitive in this conference, though.
This feels like a bunch of pieces with at least potential to score. I do think they'll be able to score. They have a trio of former ACC players, if you include John Camden, a Delaware transfer who originally started at Virginia Tech. Chris Bell is a guy who can give you 20 plus on a given night, but he also can shoot you out of games. And that's sort of why he fell out of favor at Syracuse, and he's probably going to be their best player. They do have Lee Dort, but size could be an issue for them. Defense overall, Day-Day Ames is a solid guard. He did show at Virginia that he can be a good scorer. So I do think Cal can be a thorn in team sides, but I'm just not sure if they're going to be able to defend whatsoever this year.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. That defense was not great last season, and I don't think it's going to be amazing this year, but who is amazing is Tristan Freeman. He does such great work over at Boston Brackets. He's joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, and I feel like this team is one of the bigger unknowns in the conference because with Florida State, they bring in Luke Locks, who was an assistant at the NBA level last year to take over the program, and Lajay Jones was a nice, productive player over at St. Bonaventure. year. Kobe McGee was a nice, productive player over at Drexel. So, you've got guys that were in nice big roles there. Chancey Wiggins obviously has familiarity with the ACC with being over at Clemson last season, but I feel like they're banking on a lot of mid-major guys to take a massive stride forward. And for Lux, I feel like this is a massive sink or swim sort of hire where I could see this working out really well, and I could see this also being a disaster.
Yeah, so far, he's done a lot of great work in the 2026 class, building up the talent. And there's a fair amount of size overall throughout the lineup. But like you said, a lot of these guys are mid-major scorers. You're going to need several of them to be able to play well, just to be competitive. You're also going to need, guys like Alir Malouk and AJ Swinton, some of their only return players, to be an impact player. And we'll see what happens with Alex Steen, who's a D2 transfer, who's a really good scorer. They're going to need him to be an impact player as well, unless Chauncey Wiggins, somehow breaks out in his final year of eligibility.
Yeah, but absolutely. I do think that Wiggins is quite a bit of an upside guy, but they're going to be asking a lot of him. And for Virginia Tech, it is so interesting to be taking a look at this team because obviously them not having Heisier Miller, that really set the program back. They had no defined point guard last season, and I still feel like it's a little bit of a awkward situation, and they lose Kevin Glittner late in the process. That was one of their main assistants. He's now the head coach over at Wofford, so that throws a little bit of a monkey wrench into things, but I look at Toby Luala, what he did last year, one of the more versatile, underrated players in the ACC. They bring in Amani Hansberry. Jaden Schutt had a nice year last year as well. I feel like there are good pieces here with Virginia Tech. I think the big question is, can they do a nice job of finding that defined point guard to be able to reduce on the turnovers that killed them so much towards the beginning part of the year last year?
Yeah, and it looks like the point guard's going to be, Nicholas Advadas, the Greek sensation who has been all over their social media. He's been getting as much hype as a Dame Sarr of Duke and other notable international newcomers. And it looks like he's going to be given the opportunity to run the offense. And if he's as good as has been talked about, then Virginia Tech could be a legit a sleeper because they have the front court in Lawal and West Virginia transfer Hansberry. They have shooters with Hammond and Shoot back. And then, Isaiah Pasha did the Rookie of the Year in the CAA. He's a really good athlete as well. So there's a lot to like, but they're going to need, again, Adalis to be that all-elite caliber player, or else they're going to be wandering in the lower half of the league again.
Yep, I'm right there with you. And I do think that guard play is going to be very interesting with regards to a team that's out there in your neck of the woods in Pittsburgh, because DeMarco Minor, he was very major over at Oregon State last year. Not a guy that's going to take over the game with his scoring, but did a little bit of everything, like 10 points, couple boards, couple assists. You like to see that. And Barry Dunning Jr., he was solid over at South Alabama last season, but you do have to have a few question marks with regards to the backcourt. Front court with Deshaun Jackson, I thought that was a very underrated pickup. Cameron Corrin, he has been a rock-solid big man in this conference for a long time, both with Pittsburgh and with Florida State. And when it comes to Pittsburgh, I actually like their starting five. I have question marks with the depth. Get someone like an Amari Weatherspoon, who is a freshman, be able to help out that backcourt. I think that's a big question I have with Pittsburgh. Who do they have outside that starting five?
They have, plenty of front court depth compared to last year, and it's going to be very physical inside. Roman Silepa, who is one of the top Australian prospects coming in, he's been getting a lot of hype. But yeah, it's going to come down to the backcourt scoring. Brandon Cummins did have a 30-point game as a freshman, and he's going to have a much larger role with all the top guards from Pitt last year being out. Can he be a go-to scorer? Is that something that's going to be too big for him early on? Because Minor wasn't really a scorer at Oregon State. The Iowa State transfer, Idrisitis, he had limited minutes. Maybe he's not ready. If Pitt can just find a couple of double-digit caliber scorers in the backcourt, the front court's going to be able to do their job. But, again, that's just a big question after losing both Jalen Lowe and Ish Leggett, who are two all-league guys for the team.
Yep, absolutely. It's sort of the reverse of last year, where last year the backcourt was very good for Pittsburgh. This year, the front court is very good, but a little bit uneven once again. So we'll see what we get there as Tristan Freeman, who does such great work over at Boston Brackets, is joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And I remember in one of our most recent chats, you were talking about Syracuse perhaps having a little bit of upside. And this is one of those teams that the more that I look at them, the more that I like them. With J.J. Starlin not having to have the ball in his hands as much, because I do think that there's a little bit more ball handling on the team. Nathan George coming on over from Georgia Tech. He's able to do a nice job of being able to run the show. Nate Kings was a great three-point shooter over at Oregon State. Kion Anthony, that is the son of Carmelo Anthony, is going to be coming in. They bring in William Kyle, who he's a guy that was very rock solid at the mid-major level. I look at the Syracuse team. It feels like they've got depth. It feels like they've got balance on like the first few years. And Adrian Autry, I don't know exactly what he is as a coach, but if he's a decent coach, this is a team that should be competitive and might be able to make the NCAA tournament, in my opinion.
This is the year to find out if Autry is going to be the guy, because like you said, they have talent all over the place. George led the ACC in assists, so he's literally as good of a point guard as Syracuse could have brought in. And Starlin is still a scorer. We'll see if he's a guy that can, win for you, because even back to his Notre Dame days, he just wasn't a winner. You're going to have maybe less of him, might be better, more efficient version. But they also have Sadiq White, who is a top 30 forward prospect as well. Him and a returning Donnie Freeman, their front court could be really good. And, Kings was one of the better shooters in the portal. They just have talent all over front court and back court, where if they don't finish in at least the top 8 and are on the bubble, then it should be considered a failure for them this year.
Yep, I'm in total agreement with you there. This is one of those teams that I know that not a ton of people are picking them overly high, but I look at this team and they should have quite a bit of upside with them. This team, I think, is interesting as well. With Georgia Tech, Bain Dongo, I think, is one of the more underrated players in this conference. He's 6'9". He's able to pop it from 3. He's able to give you some rebounding. He's able to give you some shot blocking. The question is, what are you going to be able to get around him? Because Cam Kraft was a really good three-point shooter over at Miami of Ohio. He comes in. And Lamar Washington put up numbers at Pacific. The problem was the turnovers with him. Washington has to fill the shoes of Nathan George, who we just talked about, who moved on over to Syracuse, and I don't think that he's going to quite be that, but I think the big question is if Washington can cut down on the turnovers or not, because if so, I actually see a little bit of upside here for Georgia Tech. If Washington is just a disaster in the backcourt, though, it's going to be a disaster of a season, in my opinion, for Georgia Tech.
Yeah, they're also going to need a big breakout year from Jaden Mustaf, who's a former top 40 prospect. Was solid as a freshman. He should get more role. But, they just lack front court depth. I mean, Bain Adonga is going to have to play 35-plus minutes. They have some freshmen coming in. Peyton Marshall is a transfer from, I believe, Ole Miss, who didn't really play much. He's probably going to have to get minutes as well. And, yeah, they're going to need Cam Kraft, who didn't do much as Xavier. He's going to have to provide them with shooting. Lamar Washington's going to have to be a key guy. But unless they have some impact freshmen that we didn't see coming, it's probably going to be another year where Ndongo gets his, but Georgia Tech can't get wins.
Yep, and I think that's so well said by you. And then this is a team where I almost feel like it might be a sink or swim season for Steve Forbes, who I love as a coach. I think that he does a tremendous job, but this team has not gotten to the NCAA tournament. And I look at the roster, and Nate Calmezzi was very rock solid over at Washington and Washington State the last few years, but he's not a guy that really shoots it well from 3, and that was a big issue with Wake Forest last year. Their three-point shooting fell completely off a cliff. Makai Mason is able to pop it a little bit from 3. Miles Colvin, he was not able to get a lot of run over at Purdue, but that's because Purdue was so deep. But I do look at this Wake Forest team. They need a breakout, in my opinion, from Juke Harris. Omaha Blue, hopefully I said that last name correct. He's a former top 30 recruit that things have just not went his way both on and off the court. And with Wake Forest, I see the upside here. But at the same time, if these guys don't hit threes much like last season, I could see this being another somewhat of a disastrous season.
Yeah, I mean, Cooper Schreiger is the big transfer pickup, average, I think, around 18 and 9 in Valpo. He should be a good fit next to Trevon Spillers, who's probably going to be their best player. But like you said, between the shooting concerns throughout the lineup and the fact that, Calmes, he was really good at Washington State, but he wasn't necessarily that good at Washington. And I'm not so certain that he's a surefire lead guard for a high major team. So you trust that Forbes can find a breakout player. He didn't really last year, because there was a lot of hype about, Tyler Johnson being a really good pickup. It just never worked out, and the team didn't really succeed as a result. If he can't find that all-league guy to at least keep them competitive, then yeah, I think his time could run out soon.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be really interesting with them, and I think that that's an underrated hot seat sort of situation, as Tristan Freeman, who does such great work over at Boston Brackets. He's joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And then this team loses a lot from last year. The coaching is obviously good with Brad Brownell, and I don't have a lot of concerns down low. Carter Welling was so rock solid at both UC Irvine along with Utah Valley. He's going to be able to provide good rebounding, shot blocking. Jake Whalen, he's a 6'10" big man that's going to help out down low. Nick Davidson has versatility, comes in from Nevada. The big question mark I have is that backcourt. As Justin Porter, he was solid over at Middle Tennessee. Can he be one of the league guards in the ACC is a big question. And can he get something out of Zach Foster, who I recognize that he's not like some sort of a top 25 prospect or anything like that, but I think that he's a high upside guy for this backcourt.
Yeah, and look, we have, coaching questions with several of the teams that's already been mentioned, but, Brad Barnell certainly gets the benefit of the doubt. Like you said, Davidson and Wellen fits really nicely with each other in the front court. And look, I think, Dylan Hunter, one of the lone returning guards, I think he could be primed for a breakout campaign. I think there's obviously going to be questions as to how good the backcourt's going to be, but I see no reason why not to think that Clemson can't be a top half of the team. Now, if the guards do struggle, Wellen's defense doesn't translate throughout the rest of the team, then they could take a step back. They obviously lost so much talent with Chase Hunter and the others, including Ian Shefflin. I could see a scenario where they fall back a bit, but certainly not by much.
Yep, and with Clemson, I feel like Brad Brownell provides his team with a really good floor as well. And then this team has not necessarily blossomed under Micah Shrewsbury the way that we were hoping in the first few years, where year number one, they just felt like a really gritty team, and year number two, it was just a little bit more up, down, all around. But they've got one of the most, in terms of most meaningful players to their respective teams, I think Marcus Burton is that. I don't think he's like a top 10 player in all of college basketball, but I think he might be a top 10 player in terms of what he means to Notre Dame, because him on the court versus him off the court last year, it was a completely different product. They bring back Brandon Shrewsbury, who's a solid three-point shooter, and they should be much better down low. Kiba Njai, and they bring in Carson Tout, a guy that averaged 12 plus rebounds per game over at Northern Arizona, and is actually a relatively good passer as big man. These guys are nice. Sir Muhammad is a guy that returns. Jalen Harrelson, I know that he's a pretty highly touted freshman. Feels like this team has a little bit more depth than for Notre Dame. I don't know if they can bust through and make the NCAA tournament, but I feel like they need to do much better than they did a season ago, because it feels like the pieces are in place for them to be at the very minimum towards the middle of this conference.
Yeah, and they're lucky that they got Burton back, because not many, 20-point per game scorers from losing teams voluntarily does. You're going to have to take advantage of that. And obviously, Burton Shrewsbury back. Jalen Harrison, a five-star caliber prospect, he should give them more of a boost. And you mentioned Tout. Their front court has been a major weakness for them. We knew last year's front court transfers weren't going to be very good, and that proved to be the case. You're going to need Tout, and obviously Kevin Njai returning to be an impact player, as well as some of their incoming freshmen. If the front court can just give them something, then I think that's going to give them 5 or 6 more wins automatically. But they are going to have to be a little bit better defensively, because sometimes they get a little too comfortable getting into shootouts, and that can bite them.
Yep, it certainly can. And with this Notre Dame team in that burn style as well, if you get down too many points, it's really hard to be able to come back, because they're not necessarily a team that's a blazer just gunning it up and down the court. And then this team, I think, is so interesting, because with North Carolina, when they were really at their peak, when they were really excelling a few years ago, that's when they had Armando Bacot. They were so good down low, and it looks like they're trying to regain that identity. 7-footer Henry Vassar comes in from Arizona. He had a really good second half of the season last year. They bring in, as I like to call him, Jonathan Boom Boom Powell, who had a nice year over at West Virginia. But the big question is the point guard play, because Kyan Evans, he was rock solid over at Colorado State. This is a big step up for him. He is a guy that was really in his first year of getting meaningful minutes over at Colorado State last year, but can he run an ACC program? Because with Seth Trimble, he's not necessarily an on-the-ball sort of guard. He sort of plays a little bit more off of it. You obviously bring in Caleb Wilson, who's a very highly touted freshman, but that's not a guy that's really going to help with the facilitation as well. I feel like Kyan Evans is low-key one of the more meaningful players in this conference, where if he ascends, North Carolina ascends, if he can't be that main guard for this team, I think they fall short of expectations.
Yeah, and you could make a case that, it was, star Nick Clifford who sort of ran the offense of Colorado State more than Evans did. Evans guy that brought the ball off the court. He's not going to be able to do that in North Carolina, like you said, in the ACC. Or they do have a couple of freshmen in Isaiah Dennis and Derek Dixon, who are other ball handlers in case Evans struggles. But it's going to come down to the front court. Stevenson's a former 5-star guy who showed flashes at Alabama. Visar is a very good, solid starter from Arizona. And then Caleb Wilson's a five-star caliber player himself who's sort of flying under the radar. If he's a one-and-done guy who gives some instant impact, then that alone is going to make them competitive. I do think that they're going to have shooting. I think they're going to have the size. The front, the point guard play might be a question, but I do think that this team has a very high floor, if nothing else.
And I do think that this team is going to be so fascinating for the upcoming season as well. As Tristan Freeman, who does such amazing work over at Boston Brackets, joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops. That'd be Miami, because Jai Lucas goes from being a big part of that Duke coaching staff. He's now going to be coaching over at Miami, and we recognize a lot of the names on the roster. Ernest Uday was a rock-solid low-post player over at TCU. Trey Donaldson, nice guard over at Auburn along with Michigan. Malik Renew put up nice numbers over at Indiana. Drew Washington, a truly good three-point shooter. They bring in Marcus Allen as well, but those are like the lone five guys that have Division I experience. They're banking on a lot of freshmen like Dante Allen and company, a few international men of mystery. I think that this is a very interesting Miami team where I could see this being one of the biggest wild cards in terms of if things go bad, things go bad, but if things go right, things can really ascend for them as well. And I feel like one bad injury could really derail things as well.
I agree. I think, the front court combination of Malik Renew and Ernest Uday is something to watch, because we saw, Renew and Omar Ballo at Indiana not mesh well. I mean, since Renew isn't really a guy that can space the floor, could those two sort of stagnate their minutes? They're probably going to have to. But, Shelton Henderson's a five-star prospect and former Duke commit who followed Lucas over from Duke. He's someone that should be primed to get a big role. If he's an impact player, that probably changes the ceiling and floor for them. Because I do think Donaldson and Washington are very good at capable guards. But yeah, they're going to need, some of these freshmen to step up and be, solid contributors off the bench. Otherwise, they're going to have a 6-7 man rotation with a bunch of guys who are good but not really good players.
Yep, I totally agree with you there. So that's going to be a very interesting one. And this team, I think, is going to be perhaps the biggest competition to Duke out there in the ACC. That'd be Louisville. With Louisville getting back Kashawn Pryor after he had a really nice 7-game sample size last year with Louisville, that's going to help them out down low. I know that there's some buzz that they might be able to get something out of Ali Khalifa. I will see it when I believe it. But the way that they brought in some nice impact transfers, bringing in Isaac McNeely, who obviously did a solid job over at Virginia last season, bringing back Javon Hadley, who's got good versatility, able to give you 7+ boards and is able to shoot it from 3. Mikael Brown, he's a guy that I think is going to be an instant impact player in that backcourt. And I just flat out at this point don't want to doubt Pat Kelsey, because I saw what he did in year number 1 over at Louisville. I think that year number 2 is really where they start to ascend.
Yeah, and look, Conwell and McNeely were two of the best shooters from the portal. So the fact that Louisville got both of them, is great. And then Mikael Brown Jr., I would argue was the MVP for Team USA this offseason, the under-19 team, even over top prospect AJ DeVansta at BYU. So him being the lead guard, I think, is going to be ideal for them. Probably going to be one of the better point guards in the country. They got a lot of front court depth. I mean, Kashawn Pryor was really good for them before he had the injury. Khalifa gives them something different with ball handling to take pressure off of Brown, and then they got several, international prospects, and we'll see if any of them, including Sanada Frew, has an impact, or even a former top 40 prospect, Connie Roofs, coming back for another year. Then all of a sudden, they're going to be a deep team that can shoot, got really good guards and depth, and yeah, there could be a chance that during league play, they're viewed as the favorites in the ACC.
Yep, and with Louisville, man, that team has a lot of depth and they've got a lot of shooting. And I know there's going to be a lot of people that disagree with me on this, but this is the team that I think can really shake up the, shall we say, traditional top 3, top 4 of the ACC. I am very in on this SMU team, bringing back Kevin Boopy Miller, who we saw how big of a drop-off Wake Forest took with/without him. And SMU, when he was on the fold, the difference that he makes when he's out there on the court versus off is big. Jerome Pierre was one of the best scorers in all of college basketball last year. Samat Yitaglu, BJ Edwards, Kerry Oquendo, those were all guys that averaged 8+ points per game last year for SMU. They're all back. Corey Washington is a nice glue guy. Sam Walters at 6'10" is able to shoot it from 3. Jermaine O'Neal's son, Jermaine O'Neal Jr. comes in. I look at this SMU team. I don't see why they're being so overlooked, because I think that there's top 25 potential here. I think that there's top 3, top 4 potential in the league, and I feel like SMU could be that breakout team in the ACC.
The reason why they're being overlooked in your eyes is because last year, anytime they played a decent team, they didn't just lose, they got destroyed. And that was the reason why they didn't make the playoffs, because their metrics were so bad, despite having one of the top offenses in the country. And they should be potent again. They should be able to score, but can this unit defend? And I don't know. Maybe, this incoming freshman class and some of the transfers can help them, and that matters. But yeah, Edwards and Miller is going to be able to score. You told Jalou could have a breakout sophomore campaign, but until this team, shows at least enough signs of life against better competition, it's hard to assume that they're going to be really good, because last year they killed bad teams and then got killed by the good teams, which made them average. So can they be better than average with so many teams losing talent? Sure, but I'm going to have to see it to believe it with this team based on some of the letdowns they had a year ago.
I am sold on SMU. I think that they're in for a big year, and this is a team that a lot of people are sold on much more than SMU, and this is a team that I'm also sold on as well. We've just seen Will Wade get the job done time and time again. He comes on into NC State. He brings on over Darion Williams. He's bringing in Trey Holloman, brought over with him a few guys from over at McNeese and Kadir Copeland, and if they could get anything out of Allen Breed, that would be nice for them, as well as he's just been so off and on injured. But they bring in Jerry Dango, I know is testing the NBA draft waters. Van Allen Lubin, I feel like has been just so badly underrated over the last few seasons. Terrence Arsenault from Houston. I look at this NC State team, it just feels like weapons upon weapons, and I feel like it might take a little bit of time for this team to gel, but this is one of the more dangerous and more, shall we say, upside teams in all of college basketball in my eyes.
Yeah, they do have upside with Darion Williams, who, was a star just as good as Toppin at times at Texas Tech. So having him as the go-to guy, it's great. But I think the front court is where the questions are going to be. Can Trey Holloman be the best guard of a top 25 caliber team? He technically was at Michigan State, though. You could argue that, Jace Richardson, gets most of the credit for that. But we'll see what he can do as a lead guy. Terrence Arsenault should be due for a bigger role. And then, Paul McNeil Jr. is a guy who was a fairly heralded recruit. He's coming back as well. We'll see what kind of impact he can make. But yeah, I think NC State's going to get a lot of eyes on them. I think their front court's going to be really good. But we'll see what their true ceiling is, because I'm not as sold as them as others, but I can also see them being really good.
And I think that this team is going to be really good as well. As we've got another first-year head coach I think is going to make a massive impact right away. That's Virginia with Ryan Odom. Ryan Odom has gotten the job done in so many different places. VCU obviously knocked off this Virginia team when he was over at Maryland, Baltimore County, and bringing in Dallin Hall to be able to run the show is a move that I absolutely love. Such a good point guard over with a BYU team that was one of the most efficient offenses in all of college basketball. Devin Tillis, amazing versatility for a UC Irvine team that played tough, tenacious defense. Malik Thomas was a nearly 20-point per game scorer on a San Francisco team that had really good balance. You bring in Jakari White, who I think is going to be a nice add in the backcourt. You've got a few international men of mysteries that come in, and Ogana Onyesu. I recognize that he had a terrible year last year over at Kansas State. This is a guy that had nearly 3 blocks per contest 2 seasons ago over at Kentucky. I think that that's a really nice buy low there, and I feel like with Ryan Odom, I don't have questions as to whether or not he's going to be able to do a great job at Virginia. It's just a question of if these pieces mesh right away, and I think that there's a good chance that they do.
Yeah, he brought in, several, guys who average 15 a game at the mid-major level, that as long as one of them translate over into an ACC caliber guy, they should be fine. But yeah, it's going to come down to the front court. I mean, Oyenso, he can get blocks, but he also can struggle in defense as well. And they have several international players coming in as well, including Matthijs de Ritter, who is viewed as probably their best big man. We'll see what kind of impact he has, because Odom could get away with, having, average and okay front court play in the A-10 because he had the best guards. But that won't be the case now in the ACC. So will the underwhelming front court play sort of hold him back? That's something I'm watching for, even if they do small lineups. But in the end, I do think it's going to be, solid first year for Odom in Virginia, one that could end up in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, but absolutely. I'm thinking that Virginia's an NCAA tournament team, and certainly think that they're going to be in the upper half of this conference. And It's very hard to pick against this team to be able to win the conference. We've got one team remaining, and it's the Big Bomber team. It's the one that we all know and love. It's Duke. They bring in the Boozer brothers, Cameron Boozer, Caden Boozer, 2 top 5 prospects. They bring back Caleb Foster, who it was very unselfish of him to take a step back last year, return this year. He should be able to see starts once again. Isaiah Evans was one of the best knockdown shooters for my money in all of college basketball last year. And Malik Brown was down with an injury last year. He's not necessarily much of a scorer, but a do-it-all sort of guy. You reference him a little bit further. Dame Sarr, being able to get him in, I think is big as well, because they were actually banking on Cedric Howard coming in, and he wound up being a first-round pick. So being able to get Sarr to be able to be sort of that 6'6", sort of do-it-all sort of guy, I think is big. And I take a look at this Duke team, and I think the bigger question is whether or not they're going to be a top 3 team nationally, not just whether or not they're going to win the ACC, because even if they don't win the ACC, I feel like they need to be the favorite coming into the year.
Yeah, I mean, Cameron Boozer is getting not necessarily at the exact level as a Cooper Flag, but just right below as someone who can easily be, a 19-10 caliber player for them as the lead guy. They bring back several guys who are breakout candidates, including Isaiah Evans, who probably could average 15 a game if given the minutes, because he's just that good of a shooter and scorer. Patrick Ngongba and Malik Brown is going to be a great 1-2 punch inside. The point guard play is going to be the question, because if you bring back Caleb Foster, who had his moments, Caden Boozer is a 5-star caliber guy himself, but he's not at the level of his brother. If the point guard play struggles, then I think Duke can be vulnerable. But other than that, they got size and shooting everywhere else, and probably still have multiple first-round picks. They're definitely the safest bet to be number 1, but I do see that there could be flaws where other teams like Louisville could take advantage.
Yep, absolutely. And it is going to be a fun year out there in the ACC, Tristan. You're doing such a great job of covering it all over there at Bustin' Brackets. And you're out there in the city of Pittsburgh, so you're covering all the local teams. You're covering Duquesne. You're doing a great job looking at the Atlantic 10 on that front. Obviously, Robert Morris and so much more. So love the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yes, sir. You can find me at hoopstunt351 on Twitter/X and at our main site, Bustin' Brackets, where we're previewing the ACC and all the rest of college basketball.
Absolutely. Tristan does such an amazing job looking at this great sport, and every single time he joins me, lends amazing insight. So big thanks to Tristan for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Coming in next, it is that time of the podcast. I give you my projector finish for the ACC. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always great to be joined by Tristan Freeman. I know he's joined me a few times for the ACC Conference Preview Edition. He does such great work over at Bustin' Brackets, Field of 68, Sleepers Media, and so much more. Just a wealth of knowledge, so great to be able to get Tristan aboard today. Big thanks to him for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you my projector finish for the ACC. Since I am doing a Conference Preview Edition today, that means that any news and notes that we saw in college basketball on Thursday, I'll be polishing those up tomorrow. Typically, we don't see a lot in late September, but we've been seeing a lot more the last few weeks with all these coaching changes, so do have to throw that in there. And I do always want these conference previews to be their own standalone sort of podcast, because every conference deserves sparkle and shine, and these should be a little bit more evergreen. So that way, if you're listening to this in late September, mid-October, just before the start of the season, you're able to get good information. And how about if we do go with dead last, 18th in my projector finish, Boston College. You've got Donald Hand, you've got Chase Forte, and really not much else with this team. Like, you look at what they're going to be throwing out there down low. Bowden Kopke is probably going to be one of their main guys. Kopke last year was over at Butler and really didn't see a lot of minutes. Like, I don't know what they're going to be able to get down low. Now, Donald Hand is a very solid player. He's going to be able to put up some good numbers for this team. Last year, he was a stat sheet sufferer with 15 points, 6 boards, shot 36.5% from three-point range. But, it's very clear that Earl Grant just has this program going in the wrong direction. It looked like they were ascending. They improved their win total for 3 straight years. Last year was a big giant step back, and they just don't have the guys, in my opinion, to be able to compete. They bring back Fred Payne from a season ago. He was able to give the team 7 points per contest, but who in the heck is going to be running point for this team? Like, are they going to have that be Forte? Like, with Chase Forte last season, he was solid over at South Dakota, 3 assists, 18 points per game, but him running the show at an ACC program, yeah, I'm very not feeling that. So if my projector finish at number 18, I do go with Boston College. At number 17, I do have to go with Cal. Now with Cal, I do feel like this is a program that actually has a really good coach, but I mean, the resources just are not there for Mark Madsen to be able to have success. You've got a few guys that are back from last year. Ryan Petraeus, who began his career over at Air Force, he was able to log for the team like 8 points, 5.5 rebounds per game. That's rock solid, but again, it goes back to my point with Boston College. Who are you really going to be having as that main point guard? You've got DJ Campbell and Day-Day Ames in the backcourt. Like, those are solid players, but those aren't necessarily guys that are going to be elevating you and taking you to the next level. They bring in Nolan Dorsey, and he should be able to give them a little bit of stretchability over at 6'5", but if you're relying upon a guy in Nolan Dorsey, who last year at Campbell averaged like 9 points, 6 boards, a mid-33 point shooter, to be elevating an ACC team, boy, you've got another thing coming. And then with Day-Day Ames, once again, he was solid over at Virginia last year with about 2 assists per contest, and he did shoot about 40% from 3, but we've seen ever since Madsen got to Cal, that same sort of defense that he had over at Utah Valley just has not been there. He doesn't necessarily have a whole bunch of size on this roster. You're going to be relying upon Milos Ilic, who comes on over from Loyola Maryland, and Lee Dort for that, and Dort is relatively solid, but if you're relying upon Ilic, that's going to be a little bit of an issue. Now, I do think that there's upside with Chris Bell. I remember 2 years ago at Syracuse, shot it relatively well from 3, and John Camden was a solid scorer over at Delaware, but keep in mind, he began his career at Virginia Tech where he just could not cut it. So I have my question marks here with Cal. I've got them number 17 in my projector finish. At number 16, I'm going to be going Florida State. For Florida State, obviously a big giant changing of the guard, as it felt like with Leonard Hamilton, he never ever aged, so that was always fun to be taking a look at. But now you bring in Luke Locks, who was over at the just NBA level in general, so this is going to be a big giant changeover for them, and whether or not this is going to be panning out is a big giant question mark, because we saw it with BYU that they went to the NBA ranks and they had immediate success. And when it comes to Florida State, you do have some talented players out there, like Lajee Jones was a nice rock solid double-figure scorer over at St. Bonaventure last season. Robert McCray is a guy that I think is going to be an interesting mixer and shaker, double-figure scorer that stays within the state over at Jacksonville, but a lot of these guys, aside from Chancey Wiggins, are going to be taking a massive stride forward, like Kobe McGee, solid 3-point shooter over Drexel. Drexel, just a completely different level. Wiggins, I really think, is going to need to be a big fulcrum piece of this team. He was able to give Clemson last year right around 8.5 points per contest, shot 36.5% from 3 at 6'10", but he didn't even grab 3 rebounds per game last season. Like, where is that rough and tumble down low going to be coming from? Feels like a team that is really going to be lacking there. They didn't necessarily bring in the world's greatest recruiting class. You've got Alir Moluk, who he stays on from last season, but he didn't see a bunch of minutes as well. So I've got big time question marks as to whether or not Locks is going to be able to coach or not, and I've got questions with regards to this roster as a whole. So with Florida State in my projector finish, I've got them at number 16. Number 15, have to go with Georgia Tech. The team in Sotomayor era just hasn't been necessarily the world's greatest. I won't call it like a complete flop at this point, because man, it's a little bit up, down all around with them, and they do bring back Bay and Dongo. 6'9", do a little bit of everything sort of guy, 13.5 points, 9 boards, shot 37% from 3 last year. I actually really like him as a player, and for Georgia Tech, they brought in some solid players in the transfer portal. Lamar Washington was a nice double-figure scorer last season, and actually began his career over at Texas Tech before he went over to Pacific last season. He was a bit of a turnover machine, though, and that really does have me scared off. Cam Kraft, he's someone that was able to shoot it relatively well from 3 over at Miami of Ohio last year. He's got solid size at 6'6". Is he going to be able to defend in this league, though? And then when it comes to down low, Mohamed Siala is a rock-solid freshman that should be able to pair up well with Peyton Marshall. Marshall is a true 7-footer, but what are you going to be able to get out of Marshall is a big giant question mark. He was averaging a point and a rebound per game at Missouri. He was a former top 100 group that just really couldn't see the floor at all. The point guard spot with Washington having so many turnovers is a big question mark, even though you do have a little bit of elevated 3-point shooting. I think that Chaz Kelly is going to be able to come in and help out that guard spot, but once again, a big theme with these teams towards the bottom. Not great point guard play, and I've got Georgia Tech. At number 15 in terms of my projector finish. At number 14, I go with Pittsburgh because I feel like there are some unknowns with the guard spot with them as well. They do bring in Barry Dunning Jr., and I do think that he's going to be able to gator Dunning, and he's going to be able to give this team quite a bit of something. Guy that began his career over at Arkansas, at South Alabama last year, was really able to blossom. 15 points, 7 boards, 2 assists, 6'5", 6'6", do it all sort of player. And DeMarco Minor is another little bit of this and that guy, but he's probably going to be undersized for this conference. He was over at Oregon State last year, 5 assists, 5 boards, 10 points per game. Not a guy that's really going to take the top off and shoot it well from 3. Can he be a good distributor? Yes, but who does he have around him in terms of being able to pop and lock him from 3-point range? Omari Weatherspoon as a freshman is probably going to need to come in and be able to give you some relatively good minutes. They do have some nice size down low, like Cam Corn is back after he was really good over at Florida State a few seasons ago. Last year, he was able to pull in there some nice boards from Pittsburgh, so that was good. Deshaun Jackson is someone that just feels like he's been all around the block coming in from Iowa State, where he was able to see some good minutes. He'll be able to give this team some rough and tumble as well, but outside of Minor, I just don't feel like this team has necessarily the shooting to be towards the top half of the conference, and I think that that's really going to hold them back. I've got Pittsburgh at number 14 in my projector finish. Number 13, I am going to be going with Stanford. Now, with Stanford, they do lose a heart and soul piece when you've got a guy that's 7 feet tall and is able to shoot it from 3-point range the way that they had last season, with having Maximine Reynaud average 20.5 points, 10.5 rebounds per game. That's a big loss, but they do retain 2 good pieces from a season ago. Ryan Arjawal along Chisholm Opara. These 2 guys combined for about 14 points per contest. Arjawal at 6'6", very versatile as well. 2 assists, 5 rebounds per game. Not a great 3-point shooter. Opara actually shot 46% from 3 coming on over from Harvard. I don't think that he's going to be able to duplicate that, but I actually do think that this is a hire in Kyle Smith that's going to work out quite well for Stanford. And keep in mind that Stanford was able to go 11-9 in conference last year. Like, I'm seeing a lot of people picking them in like the bottom 3, bottom 4, and I feel like that's a little bit disrespectful. Benny Giehler is certainly going to need to take a little bit of a stride forward. He's going to be entrusted with the, shall we say, running of the offense quite a bit more, but I think that he's going to be able to do so. Multiple assists per contest. He was mostly coming in off the bench, and he was able to do a nice job for this team as well. So I do think that there's some upside there. They really didn't bring in a lot of transfers, as this is a program that is very tough to be able to get into with the high academic standards, but I look at what's coming back, and I do think that there's enough upside here for them to be able to win some games, maybe not have the same level of success that they did a season ago, but I do like what they've got down low, and Aiden Kaman, hopefully I said that correct, as well, being able to take some strides forward as a sophomore after he was pretty much glued to the bench last season. So in terms of my projector finish at number 13, I'm going to be going with Stanford. At number 12, I do go with Miami. I do have some question marks with Miami, with Jai Lucas taking over the program, and Trey Donaldson and Malik Renew are 2 really good pieces to be able to build around, but I do have a few question marks with just Lucas in terms of his X's and O's, because we flat out have not seen them. And for Trey Donaldson, when he was over at Michigan last season, 4 assists, 11.5 points per game, but he was one of the main ball handlers for a team that turned the ball over left and right. Solid 3-point shooter, shooting about 37.5% from 3-point range, and Malik Renew, he was able to put up some very solid numbers last year, but it felt like they were some hollow numbers when they were at Indiana last year, like 13.5 points, 5.5 boards. He, at 6'9", is able to attempt threes, but is a career 26% 3-point shooter, and I do question a lot of the depth as well. What are you going to be able to get out of some of these freshmen like Adonte Allen, Shelton Henderson? They're going to need to step in right away, because you've got essentially 5 guys that have Division I experience. Ernest Uday, he comes on over from TCU after he had a very nice season down low, 5+ rebounds per game out of them. Drew Washington, he is a truly good 3-point shooter, was able to shoot 40+% at New Mexico, but it's not like he was like a feature guy for them as well. And then after those main guys, Marcus Allen as well, you just don't have a lot of experience on this roster, and I think that that's where Miami is going to be going a little bit wrong. So I do have Miami at number 12 in terms of my projector finish. Number 11, I do go with Wake Forest. With Wake Forest, they just have not been able to break through under Steve Forbes, and I look at the guys that are coming in, and I'm just underwhelmed, to say the least. The big thing with Wake Forest last year is that their 3-point shooting just flat out fell off a cliff, and Nate Kalmezi, he's going to be coming over after he put up some solid numbers over at Washington State with 15 points, 4.5 assists. Like, I think that he's a good ball handler. He also shot last year 29% from 3, and when he's been outside the Southland Conference, he has not shot shot above 30% for three-point range. And that's a bit of an issue. Cooper Schwieger, great numbers over at Valparaiso. 15.5 points, 7.5 boards. At 6'9", he's able to pop it from three. Problem is he shot less than 30% from three-point range last season as well. You got Omaha Blue, who I think he's just an interesting player. Like, this is a guy that when he was committing over at Iowa State, he was like a top 25 recruit. Just wasn't able to get out there on the floor last year. He's dealt with some health issues. He's dealt with some off-court issues. So, I mean, it's been a long and winding road for him. Can he ever reach his, like, true potential, for lack of a better term? Miles Colvin was just unable to get out there on the floor for Purdue. I don't think that that's any knock against him because Purdue, we saw what they were last season, but I feel like Makai Mason is a little bit of an X-factor guy. He's someone that's 6'5", so he's going to be able to stretch the floor a little bit for Wake Forest, a guy that last year when he was over at Washington, about 10 points per contest, he shot 40% from three, but is he going to be able to duplicate that where he's probably going to be one of the main three-point shooters? And I look to Juke Harris to be able to give you a bit of something in season number 2 in this program as well, but Steve Forbes, for as great of a coach as I think that he is falling short at Wake Forest, and I can't think anything otherwise until he breaks through. So I do have Wake Forest in my projector finish at number 11. At number 10, I'm going with Virginia Tech. Now, for Virginia Tech, obviously, a lot of, shall we say, intrigue with them because they take a loss on their coaching staff very, very late in the process with Coach Ryan Glittner going on over to Wofford, so that hurts them. Obviously, they were expecting Heisier Miller to be their point guard last year. That caused last year to be just a completely lost year in general, and now they're trying to pick up the pieces, so they did find someone that is so versatile in Toby Luell, who I think is going to be rock solid. Again, the point guard spot is just still such an issue with this team, especially with Brandon Rechsteiner deciding that he's going to be transferring out of the program, but Toby Luell, he's a good antidote to whatever stink that you sort of have, as last season he was able to do a nice job of being able to stuff the stat sheet for this team. Stands right around 6'8", 12.5 points, 7 boards, was able to shoot 37% from three-point range, so a lot to be able to build around there. And I do still think that Mike Young is a relatively solid coach, but still, with his just system in general, it relies upon good guard play. Jaden Schutt, who's back from a season ago, he was able to average about 8 points per contest, and he showed some moments of brightness towards the back half of the season as well. He's going to need to take some massive strides forward, as well as you're probably going to be looking at Tyler Johnson having the ball in his hands a little bit more as well. He was a starter towards the back half of the season, actually shot 44% from three-point range in conference play, and when it got to conference play, because the ACC does not have a lot of teams that generate a bunch of turnovers, this team was able to ascend a little bit more. They also bring in Isaiah Pesha, who was over at Delaware last season. He was a rock-solid combo guard for them, but again, that really lack of a dominant point guard, even with bringing in Amani Hansberry from West Virginia, I think that that's going to be a little bit of an issue, but I do think that Virginia Tech, with having a guy like Luell, going to be much improved from his season ago, so I do have this bunch in Virginia Tech at number 10 in my projector finish. Number 9, I do go with Clemson. Clemson loses just so much from a season ago. They do bring back RJ Godfrey, and they're going to be rock solid down low. You're bringing Carter Welling. Welling was able to fill it up over at Utah Valley and over at UC Irvine's outside for the Anteaters over the last 2 seasons, so you know that he's going to be able to give you some shot blocking. You know that he's going to be able to give you some good rebounding, and Godfrey was just a rock solid glue guy for the team last year. He was able to give the team 6.5 points, 4 rebounds per game, I should say 2 years ago for Clemson, because he was at Clemson, goes to Georgia, now he's back at Clemson, so that's what we could like to call a boomerang transfer. But when he was over at Clemson 2 years ago, 6 points, 3.5 boards per contest, he's able to shoot it from 3, but that's not necessarily a specialty at right around about 6'8". But when it comes to just what you're going to be able to get out of the backcourt, they're really banking hard on Dylan Hunter along Justin Porter, with Porter probably needing to have the ball in his hands quite a bit. And I mean, he was a nice guard over at Middle Tennessee, 15 points per game, but he's not really too much of a point guard. Shot 36.5% from three-point range, so that means that you're going to be probably seeing a lot of Dylan Hunter. And I do think that Zach Foster, who is a freshman for this team, that's a little bit of an unknown. He's probably going to need to step up as well, because Hunter, I mean, last season, he, as a former top 150 recruit, 5.5 points, 2 assists per contest. You just don't have a lot of ball handling on this team. Dick Davidson, rock solid rebounder over at Nevada, who does a nice job of being unselfish as a big man as well in terms of his passing as well, but that's a big question mark I have. Clemson's going to be rock solid on defense. They're going to be good on the glass. Who's going to help run the point for this team? So that's why I've got Clemson at number 9 in terms of my projector finish. At number 8, I go with Syracuse. Now, the coaching concerns that you've got with Adrian Autry are very, very real, but you bring back Donnie Freeman and J.J. Starlin. That is a good place to start, and Nate Kings was the Kings of being able to shoot it really well from three over at Oregon State last year. Guy had 12 points per contest on 44.6% three-point shooting. That's big because J.J. Starlin, not a guy that's going to completely light you up from three. He, for his career, shoots 29.6% from three, but he's able to take over a game with being able to supply 18 points, 3 assists per contest. Honestly, I think taking a little bit off his plate, I think it could be a case of less is more with him. You bring back as well Donnie Freeman, who he was just limited due to injury last year, only was able to get out there for 14 games in the small sample size he had. 13.5 points, 8 boards. He's able to shoot in the mid-30s from three-point range, so he lends some really good versatility there. I do think that Nathan George is really going to do a nice job of being able to take a lot off the load of J.J. Starlin. He was a nice point guard over at Georgia Tech last 2 seasons, 4+ assists per contest, has had his runs where he's able to give you like 15, 20 points per game as well. And Sadiq White is a very intriguing freshman along with Keon Anthony. That is the son of Carmelo Anthony. I think that they come in right away. They're going to be nice rotational pieces. I think that this Syracuse team is going to have relatively good depth. They need to generate turnovers a little bit better than they did last year. 2 years ago, they were solid. Last year, they really took a step back there, but I think that they have the personnel to do so. Not going to completely intimidate you down low, but I do like the guards that they have, and bringing back Donnie Freeman after he was injured last year, I think is massive. So, do I have Syracuse ascending here? I've got them at number 8 in terms of my projector or finish. Number 7, I go with Notre Dame. Micah Shrewsbury, I still think, is one of the more intelligent minds in all of college basketball, and I think that they've got, honestly, one of the best takeover guys in college basketball, and one of the guys that are going to be so significant to their team that it's not even funny. Like, you can talk about best players in all of college basketball. I'm not saying Marcus Burton is a top 10 player in all of college basketball, but he might be a top 10 player in terms of what he means to his team, because Notre Dame, with/without Marcus Burton, is going to be a completely different beast when he's off the floor, because last year, this guy averaged 21.5 points, 3.5 boards, 3 assists, shot 37.5% from 3, and when he was banged up, Notre Dame just took a big giant fall off a cliff, and now they bring in Carson Tout, one of the best rebounders in all of college basketball. Now, might be a little bit undersized for the ACC. Stands in that neighborhood about 6'7", but over at Northern Arizona, 13.5 points, 12.5 boards, very good passer as big man as well. 3.5 assists per game. Not a guy that's going to pop it and lock it from 3-point range, but that's why you've got Brandon Shrewsbury, who over the last few years has shot over 35% from 3. He's capable of giving the team double figures this year. Kiba Njai is going to be nice down low as well. Sir Muhammad, great name. He saw some solid minutes last season. I think that he's going to be able to take some strides forward as well. They didn't completely dominate in the transfer portal or anything like that, but I thought that they brought in some good guys, and I do think that their freshman in Jalen Harrelson at 6'6", he's going to be able to do a nice job stretching the floor, give the team a little bit of three-point shooting pop that they need, and I do think that Notre Dame is finally going to start to find it under Micah Shrewsbury here. I've got them at number 7 in my projector finish. A lot of people are going to spit out whatever they're drinking right now when I give this out. Number 6, I'm going with North Carolina. I've got massive question marks with this team. Now, I love the addition of 7-footer Henry Vassar. He was really able to ascend at Arizona last year. I think that he comes in right away. He's able to give you a really, really just good effort in general. As for Vassar, last season, he was relatively on the bench to begin the campaign. You take a look at him non-conference versus conference play. In conference play, he was averaging right around about 11 points, 5.5 boards, was shooting 39% from 3. That's the sort of versatility that North Carolina likes. And when North Carolina has always been so rock solid, and when they have been able to really live up to their billing, has been with good rebounding. You go back to the Armando Bacot days, and they're going to be banking on the freshman and Caleb Wilson, a top 10 recruit, to be able to do so there. They also bring in Jonathan Boom Boom Powell, who I liked what he was able to do over at West Virginia last year, but I don't know if Jonathan Boom Boom Powell is going to be necessarily like a super duper takeover guy or anything like that. With Powell, 8 points, 3 boards at 6'6", shot in the mid-30s from 3, was a nice system player over there, and he should be able to help out a North Carolina team that's been struggling a little bit with regards to their defense, but now the offense is going to be relying upon Kyan Evans being able to dole it out, which he was solid over at Colorado State last year. 4+ assists per game. He's a solid 3-point shooter, but he has to go from Colorado State running the show over there to now North Carolina. That's a big question mark. And Seth Trimble, he's just very much an off-the-ball sort of guy that shoots less than 30% from 3. Let's call it what it is. That's a little bit of an issue. So I do think that for North Carolina, they've got the big brand name. I do think that Jaron Stevenson is also going to be able to come in from Alabama, give this team some nice help down low as well, but I've got concerns with this guard play, and they're really banking on Caleb Wilson coming in and dominating right away, and I'm not sure if he's able to do so. Number 6 in my projector finish, going with North Carolina. At number 5, I've got Virginia. With Virginia, I'm very bullish on the backcourt of this team. Dallin Hall and Malik Thomas are coming in after they were spending some time out there on the West Coast. For Thomas, former top 100 recruit that was able to put up 20 points on 39.5% three-point shooting over at San Francisco. Good enough to be able to dole it out a little bit. Obviously, that's not necessarily going to be a specialty, but that's why you bring in Dallin Hall. With Hall, a little bit over 4 assists for one of the most efficient offenses in all of college basketball last year over at BYU. Ryan Odom, the guy just flat out knows how to coach. Like, he took down this very Virginia team as a 16 seed when he was over at Maryland, Baltimore County many years ago. So, I mean, a little bit of a full circle moment there, but I'm just a very big believer in the way that things are spread out with this team. Devin Tillis, he's a guy that's 6'6", was able to put up over at UC Irvine, 6+ rebounds at 6'6", shoots it really well from 3-point range. Sha'Carri White is a guy that I think is going to do a really nice job of just being able to fit this team's needs in terms of 3-point shooting. Was a part of one of the most efficient offenses in all of college basketball over at North Dakota State last season. And Ogana Onyesu, I'm willing to buy low on him as well. I think that a lot of people have forgotten that this guy 2 years ago was one of the better shot blockers in all of college basketball. Last year was a forgotten season on a Kansas State team where it just felt like there was a lot of selfishness and guys trying to get theirs in general. But at Kentucky 2 years ago, not much of a score, 3.5 points per contest, but he was putting up 2.8 blocks per game in 18.8 minutes. In terms of blocks on a per minute basis, he was one of the best players in all of college basketball. That is going to give them some nice rim protection. I think that allows them to be able to send it in this conference. So at number 5 in my projector finish, I am going with Virginia. Number 4, I'm going with NC State. For NC State, this is a team that I think might struggle a little bit early because you've got a lot of moving parts. So obviously with Will Wade, he brings over with him someone like Kadir Copeland, who was a big reason why the team was able to have success last season out there at McNeese State, win a game in the NCAA tournament. And Allen Breed just continues to be a wild card because if Allen Breed is fully healthy, he played 2 games last year. He had 35 points in those 2 games, and he showed some great promise over at Providence a few seasons ago, but just as dealt with so much injury in general. Copeland, you know a little bit more of what you're getting with him. 4.5 assists, 9 points per contest as a little bit of a 6'6" point forward over at McNeese last year. Do love that, but I mean, you've got obviously Darian Williams, who's going to be coming over, and he at 6'6" at Texas Tech, he was one of the main catalysts for a team that very nearly knocked off Florida in the NCAA tournament last year. There's not a thing that this guy doesn't do. 15 points, 5.5 boards, 3.5 assists, shoots in the mid to high 30s from 3-point range. You're bringing Terrence Arsenault, who he wasn't necessarily the world's greatest fit over at Houston, but a very highly touted guy, a guy that still saw relatively solid minutes for a Houston team that made the title game last season. I believe that he can be a rock-solid 3-point shooter at 6'5", shot about 34% last season. And Trey Holloman, you bring him in to be able to run the show after he was such a nice point guard over at Michigan State last season. You've got some great depth with someone like a Paul McNeil being able to come in off the bench. I think that this team is really poised to be able to have a nice season out there in the ACC, and I haven't even mentioned Jerry Dang, who he was testing the NBA draft waters after he had a solid year over at Florida State last year. So number 4 on my projector finish, I'm going to be going with NC State. This is going to surprise a lot of people. Number 3, a lot of people are saying, I haven't heard SMU yet. We're going SMU. You bring back guys. Thank you. Like, these teams that are bringing back guys that are having chemistry are teams I'm really high on. And with SMU, you've got a guy in Kevin Boopy Miller that we saw the pitfall that Wake Forest had when he was off the floor last year versus when he was running the show. This guy knows what he's doing at the point guard spot. Dealt with a little bit of injury last year, but I mean, that guy put up some nice numbers with Kevin Boopy Miller, right around about 13 points, 5.5 assists per contest. He was missing for quite a few games towards back half of the season last year, but you bring back Harry Anaquindo, who when he was over at Oregon and Georgia, he wasn't necessarily the most efficient shooter. Last year, shot 42% from 3. Samat Yedoglu, rock solid player down low, 10.6 boards blocked per contest as a freshman. He's back. BJ Edwards, he's back. Guy that's able to shoot in the mid-30s from 3. He's able to give you some facilitation at 3.5 assists per contest, 2.4 steals per game. One of the best at being able to generate turnovers at the power conference level last year. Was able to take some strides forward. He had 10 points per game. You bring in Corey Watt, Washington, guy that I think really fits this system. Over at Wichita State, he was able to do it all. At St. Peter's, he was the main man over there. I think that he's going to do a nice job being able to fit that role. Sam Walters at 6'10", he's able to give you a little bit of three-point shooting. Began his career over at Alabama, saw some nice minutes over at Michigan last season. I'm very bullish on this team. Oh yeah, and they've got Jermaine O'Neal Jr., Jermaine O'Neal's son, coming on over as well. Give me a buy low here on SMU to surprise a lot of people. Andy Enfield, I know that a lot of people like to throw out there that he's sometimes falling a little bit short. I think that this is the year that they ascend. Give me SMU at number 3 in terms of my projector or finish. At number 2, I'm going with Louisville. Louisville obviously has to replace a lot of pieces from ACCs ago, but out of sight, out of mind guys coming back is very big, and Keshawn Pryor is the biggest of them. Who knows if we're going to get anything out of Ali Khalifa or not? If they do, great. If not, they're going to be fine. With Pryor, he was out after 7 games last year, was averaging 12.6 boards, multiple assists. When he was over at South Florida 2 years ago, was able to shoot in the mid-30s from 3 at 6'9". Like, this is a guy that I think is really going to blossom in this Louisville system. Like, with Louisville, yeah, you do lose so many of those guys, like a Terrence Edwards, Chucky Edburn from a season ago. But that said, bringing back Javon Hadley, I thought was very big for this team after he was able to lead the way in terms of rebounding, 7 boards. He's able to throw in there like 12 plus points per contest, shot 38% from 3, all sorts of versatility there. And then you bring in Adrian Woolley. He was very good over at Kennesaw State. We give our Odelaine Kiffin go Owls there. Isaac McNeely, who was over at Virginia, a really good bomb it from 3-point range guy. He should be able to absolutely flourish in this Pat Kelsey style. Mikal Brown is a freshman that I really think is going to be able to shoot it well from 3. I think that he's going to be a big part of this offense as well. I think that they've got some relatively good depth. Keep in mind Kobe Rogers, who's going to be coming on over from Charleston as well. So I do think that with this Louisville team under Pat Kelsey, I just believe in what he's building. I believe in this backcourt, and having Keshawn Pryor back is going to make them dominant down low. I've got Louisville at number 2, my projector finish. Number 1, I have to go with Duke. Like, there's just no getting around it. You bring in the Boozer brothers. Both of these guys are going to be absolute dominators. Cameron Boozer at 6'9" has just so much versatility. Caden is more around 6'5", but I think that he's going to do a nice job around the perimeter, and I thought it was big that they kept both Caleb Foster and Isaiah Evans, 2 of those big-time bomber recruits that came in from a season ago as well. Evans just a really good 3-point shooter at 41% from 3 at 6'6", so hard to guard, and this Duke team just features length upon length upon length. Every single player on the roster is at least 6'5", and then you bring back Malik Brown, which I remember going into the NCAA tournament, we were all asking, is Malik Brown really going to be missed? Like, I mean, he doesn't give you a lot of scoring. He only gave you about 2.5 points per contest, but a really good defense-oriented guy, and a lot of people don't want to recognize this. Duke has been one of the best teams in all of college basketball with regards to their defense ever since they had the passing of power on to John Shire. John Shire has done a nice job of slowing this team down, having them play really good sound defense. Everyone loved to take a look at the highlight reel plays with Cooper Flagg. They all loved to see Con Kneppel shooting it from 3 and all those guys that were able to go bombs away there. But this is a really good defensive team, and I do think that Caleb Foster, after he took a little bit of a reduced role from season number 1, like he is back for his junior year. As a freshman, he saw quite a few starts at Duke. Last year, he was called upon to come off the bench a little bit more. As a freshman, he shot 40% from 3. I think that he gets back to his freshman ways, and I think that he ascends a little bit more off of that. I'm going to say this name incorrectly. Nicolas Camina, he comes in. He's at 6'8", going to be able to give this team a little bit more versatility as well, and then bringing in Dame Sarr as well as a little bit of an international man of mystery. I think that that is going to be very, very helpful as well, because they were banking on having Cedric Howard out there. They are not going to have him, which that hurts them a little bit, not in terms of winning the conference in my opinion, but having Sarr as a little bit of a replacement to him, I think that that is going to be able to help this team out as well. I think that Duke is going to be playing some great defense. I think that they've got just so much size around the perimeter that they are going to be hard to guard once again, and the Boozer brothers, they are the real deal. Number 1 in my projector finish, I'm going with Duke, and that'll wrap things up for the ACC Conference Preview Edition right here on Cuts Go Seeps, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Big thanks to Tristan Freeman of Bustin' Brackets for joining me in segment number 2. If you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Cuts Go Seeps, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters EM, they mean does not matter, so per usual, please do send these into the timeline, and the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. I'm with you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season, and with this, 4 more conference previews remaining. The rest of the power conferences, they're going to be previewed here in the next few weeks, so be on the lookout for that, and be on the lookout for a fresh podcast tomorrow. Thank you.